Thank you, James, for that kind intro. I'm going to play a quick video for you all, just because it's loud and cool. Oh, no, we're not. You know what? All right, that's better, right? One more ear-splitting moment for everyone. So thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you very much for the IAB, first and foremost, for this amazing venue. This is a proper stage. I've done a few talks since COVID, and this is maybe the first time I've actually felt like we're on a real legit stage. So many kudos to the IAB. I do unfortunately have the unenviable task of going right after your break, so I'm essentially going to be breaking up one of the few moments you have for socialization across this event to talk to you about socialization. But in this case, how it occurs within gaming and why we should care about this as we think about opportunities within the gaming ecosystem. So James did a little bit of a too-kind intro for me, so I'm not going to dwell here, except if you want to see how I look when you take a photo of me with really great lighting. Beautiful. And I'm here with Activision Blizzard. For those of you that are not familiar with Activision Blizzard, we're one of the biggest game publishers in the world, including a multitude of multi-billion-dollar franchises ranging from Call of Duty to World of Warcraft to Candy Crush. So across all of these, we are fundamentally a games publisher. That means that we are very conscientious about how we work with brands within our games. We first and foremost want to make sure that our game players have a great experience, but also that we're creating great experiences for our marketing partners. So what that means is, because we control the broader ecosystem around our games, it might not be the case that every potential opportunity is right for every brand. So in that way, what we can do is offer a multitude of potential entry points. So we heard a lot from our partners and colleagues in the in-game business earlier on, so I'm not going to dwell there, but lots of opportunities for advertisements and sponsorships within many of our mobile apps. We've had a lot of great partners, including Procter & Gamble and Unilever, really kind of lean into these potentialities. The second is when we're talking about a little bit further from the in-game experience to around the game. This kind of formulates in a few different ways, but I think one of the better ways to think about it is with esports and the sponsorship opportunities available there across a couple of our leagues, aligned with games like Call of Duty and Overwatch. And then finally, one step further, we have things that we call away from game or game adjacent. And what this means is things that are kind of not necessarily within the game or gameplay environment, but in the broader world. And this takes the form of things like IP partnerships and corporate alliances or whatnot, inclusive of this partnership we had in Call of Duty Modern Warfare with Grubhub. So long and short, lots of potential areas to integrate, but across all of them, something that we take very seriously is making sure that the impact for brands is well known and transparent within these activations. This is due not least to the fact that a lot of my background is in measurement research, and I have been super annoying about it for many, many years to make sure that we're on the cutting edge of that. So much so that we'll be announcing tomorrow that Activision Blizzard will be the first, and I think the only game offering that has attained the IAB's new gold standard. So it's something that we really believe in the power of marketing within games and want to make sure that advertisers understand that by merit of the results that they see in these ecosystems. So understanding that there's a few different touch points to go to potentially enter into gaming. The question becomes which one makes sense. And for the most part, that does kind of depend on what your marketing tactics are. But realistically, how we tend to coach our clients is to really lead with insights on the player, because that effectively will yield some of the best opportunities. And that brings us to our topic for today. So as noted, what I want to do is talk a little bit about insights on socialization within gaming. And the reason I want to do that, again, as James noted at the top of today, this is the first time we've been able to be together in the IAB UK as one. Before that, we were obviously in a lockdown, and we found that during that lockdown, one of the superpowers of gaming, which is to say that allows for very intimate socialization without the needs of physicality, really kind of shone through. And if you're not familiar with the gaming space, understanding it through the lens of something like socialization or even social media can kind of help to wrap your head around it. If it sounds weird that I'm saying you can think about gaming with reference to something like social media, stick with me to the end of the presentation, and I promise it'll make sense. And then finally, we want to level set that for the most part, when we think about what it means to have effective advertising, effective marketing, we want to keep the needs of the consumer first and foremost, right? So effective marketing will always hinge on making sure we understand the need state of the consumer in a given media channel. Effective game advertising will follow the same. So we spend a lot of time working with our brands and partners to make sure that they're equipped with the latest insights in terms of how gamers are orient themselves around these platforms. So to that end, I wanted to share some results from an ongoing series of research that we've been doing, concentrating specifically on a subcut for respondents here in the UK, talking about socialization for adults 18 plus that have been playing games or using social media. So at the top, when we think about, what are some of the need states that people have when they play video games, it's kind of what you expect, and you probably have seen data similar to this in the past. We want to relax, we want to pass the time, we want to escape from everyday life. Not entirely different, I think, than some other forms of media. But if we look a little bit further, what we'll find is that a little over a third of respondents really identify that the social aspects of the games is something that they turn to as something that fulfills a needed emotional state for them. This plays out in a couple different ways, given that unlike other types of media, video games are obviously quite immersive and interactive. So at a minimum, it means that there's a lot more surface area for that potential interaction. We kind of know, focusing on the mobile space, that folks spend a lot of time in-game. That's kind of the point. That's one of the reasons that marketers tend to be really interested in this channel, even above and beyond things like social media. The approach and the mindset that they have approaching these types of experiences are also a little bit different. And what we find is that players tend to express feelings that are more along the lines of relaxed or happy and whatnot when they're thinking about game environments relative to something like social media. So long and short, what we're finding is that the surface area and contours of the potential social interactions that are having in these games is very unique and something that inherently leans towards positive. By the way, I'm cognizant that people are trying to take pictures of these slides. I'm going to go fast because I want to get my guest on stage. You can find this research at our booth. There's a QR code you can scan. You can download it. You can also get a free game. If you're doing it just for the free game, I'm not going to be insulted, but don't feel the need to take pictures unless you would like a picture of me. So when we move forward and we think about, okay, so inherently positive social interactions, how does this play out? Well, it means that there's a lot of it. So we saw before a little over a third of folks identify socialization as a needed emotional state, but realistically just under 2/3 actually participate in social play, either online or offline. So long and short, what we'll find is that individuals playing games together is more common than solo play. So much so that if we look at one of these really crucial axes, which is to say how individuals want to develop relationships with their friends and families, people who play games identify gaming as one of the main ways to do so. Only phone calls and texts were higher and marginally so. So to be clear, what we're saying here is that if you're a game player, often one of your most preferred channels for interacting with your friends and family is through gaming instead of or relative to things like social media. So much so that if we look at the reasons through which people tend to interact with others through these kind of social aspects, we find that a good way to connect with friends and family is one of the first things that pops out, even above and beyond things that are more game specific, whether that is looking for competition or aligning on strategies or what have you. So long and short, when I go and I talk about what it means to think about the rise of gaming, it's not just a media platform that's becoming more popular. What we're seeing is that gaming is kind of on the leading edge of a fundamental reconfiguration of the media landscape and consumer landscape, one where we are increasingly leaning towards more interactive experiences. And what this means is that we're continuing to channel a lot of our needs through this medium, and that also it's going to take a variety of formats. As noted at the top, there are opportunities across a wide spectrum of potential placements within the ecosystem, whether it's in-game adjacent or outside of it. And likewise, the social components of gaming also are across these different ways of interaction. So we'll see that, for things that are adjacent, like esports, there's certainly a lot of folks who use that as a primary mechanism for socialization. Above and beyond that, again, almost 2/3 of individuals carry on the gaming conversation on platforms that are outside of gaming. So what this means, very crucially, is that even games that are inherently solo have a social component. You take a game like Candy Crush, it is inherently a solo game, but the King's community has millions of players that basically log on and talk about and strategize about the game. So if you're a savvy marketer, you can understand that there are mechanisms through which you can tap into the power of this social interactivity across a multitude of touch points, whether it is multiplayer, inherently more socially oriented games, or even solo games. And one final note, I think, first of all, I want to commend everyone on not talking about the metaverse too much. But I wanted to put one slide up here because I think it kind of hinges on the fact that realistically, if we are thinking about how to orient ourselves towards socialization that's increasingly like game-like environments, something like the metaverse is going to come up. If we're looking for consumers that really kind of understand this technology, perhaps not surprisingly, those in gaming communities tend to be a little bit on the leading edge in terms of knowledge of it. So much in the same way that if we're looking for those consumers, in the same way that I will consult with marketers, that if you want to understand something like the metaverse, look to gaming, because much of what we consider to be the metaverse is essentially gaming experiences or ones that are gaming antecedents. This also happens to be really wonderful bait for my guests that I'm going to bring on stage in just a moment. So wrapping up quickly, again, as noted, there's a multitude of ways that you can enter into the gaming ecosystem, both in, away, or adjacent to it. And to decide which one makes the most sense, what we want to do is really kind of look to the insights to guide what we're trying to do with our strategies and figure out how that we can capitalize upon some of the social effects that occur throughout these entry points. Because we know that not only is socialization quite prevalent, it happens online and offline and extends beyond the game. So in the same way that we look to social media and really hinge on it to have some of those wonderful amplification effects or halo effects, we can look to gaming the same way. Not that it's social media per se, but it is inherently a social medium. So I've been on stage for about 10 minutes, solo, talking about socialization. That doesn't make sense. I would like to invite my very special guest on stage, Mr. James Whatley, the Chief Strategy Officer at Diva Agency. Wow, you get music too.
Amazing, thank you. Hi, everyone.
That's pretty cool. So James, thanks for joining me. It was getting lonely up here. Before we jump into things, could you do a little bit of intro of yourself, Diva Agency? Tell us how you fit into this whole gaming ecosystem.
So I work at Diva. Diva, we describe ourselves as a gaming native creative agency. We've spent the last 15 years helping the biggest publishers and developers sell their games to gamers. And the past, I would say, 3 to 5 years, been working with gaming adjacent brands to use that expertise to speak to that community of players.
So realistically, then, you're working across a number of constituents here. And, I started by talking about the different ways in which brands can potentially enter the gaming ecosystem. How do you think about that when you're working with brands or even the publishers? And what kind of advice would you have around that for marketers?
So we always talk about having a player-first mentality. So an elephant in the room is gamers are fickle. And most of them are pricks. So, getting them to...
Myself included.
I mean, but really, like people who self-identify as gamers, they have a really bad online reputation. And so we don't talk about gamers at Diva, we talk about players. We talk about people that play games. I won't do it because we don't have time, but if we made everyone stand up in the room who had played a game, a lot of the room would stand up. If we said stand up in the room if you're a gamer, less than that would stand up. Like the self-identification process is different. And so when we're talking to clients, it's always like, okay, brand, you want to talk to a player that plays a shit ton of COD. You want to talk to a player that plays this game and where and how. And then what's the thing that's going to make them interested in you? How are you going to get them to put down the weapon and look at your ad, or turn up from the poker game they're playing and look at your ad? Because not being invasive and contributing to the game is kind of how we try and pitch it.
Got it. And I mean, I think it's an important point that even when I work with brands, we try to stay away from the term gamers, even though it's convenient, because that's kind of a loaded term. And candidly, what we found in research that we've done in the past is that, to your point, only a very small minority of individuals actually identify as gamers. So thinking about it through the lens of game players is both healthy, but then also starts to kind of suss out what we think about from quote unquote more hardcore gamers to folks that are more kind of casually oriented towards the space. Which I guess, kind of is a nice layup for, thinking about, I've been up here talking a big game about the necessity of insights and understanding the players and whatnot. Where have you seen that kind of come to life in terms of the work that you've done?
In regards to looking at player insight?
Yeah, using player insights for navigating the ecosystem, understanding the ecosystem, et cetera.
So to me, again, it comes back to what is going to make, coming from ad land, I came from, spent 10 years in network agency land, coming into the gaming category, it blows my mind that everything we're taught, like Byron Sharp and all of that jazz, mass penetration, is completely tipped on its head when you look at the gaming category if you want to speak specifically to the hardcore players, because you need to start small and then grow up from there, versus taking, I don't know, your 6-second Facebook ad and just trying to wipe it across every single surface you can find in a game doesn't really work. Making it relevant for the placement in-game I think really works. And so I saw a great thing, I think it was in The Drum, they did a gaming special a little while ago, and somebody had put a Burger King ad on a billboard in Elden Ring. I mean, it was mocked up. And Elden Ring, the biggest game of the year that none of you have heard of, is the platinumed it. But basically, the billboard doesn't work because obviously it doesn't show up. So we work best when we're putting stuff in front of players that they want to see.
Which makes a ton of sense. I mean, I think here in previous conversations, when I talk about, applicable entry points, I say, look, I love McDonald's. I love McDonald's as a brand. I don't want to see it in the sanctuary world of Diablo. That does not make sense to me. They do not have convenient burger services there.
I think my favorite example of yours, you put a Lamborghini in World of Warcraft, right? You love to do that.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely something that, the more that we can put like Lamborghinis and sports cars, it totally contextualizes the world for us. And, here too, so I've been talking a big game up here about a lot of things, but one of which is obviously droned on for about 10 minutes about socialization. So in some of the work that you've done, either with the game companies or the endemic brands, or again, maybe even advice that you'd give to the broader marketing community, how do you think this plays in? Like, have I just been selling them nonsense, or do you buy into that?
No, it makes a lot of sense.
It's a loaded question, by the way. You have to agree.
What I find fascinating about it is when you look at it through the people that play lens, people that play all kinds of different games, and the gamut of games available these days is crazy. It's not just like, oh, there's 3.2 billion gamers, so therefore we can speak to them all with this one ad. You have to think about, right, what platform and where. And one of your colleagues always says to me, if you're advertising in Coronation Street, you should be advertising in Candy Crush. That's where those two things marry up. Oh yeah, because they're the same people watching that show and playing that game. And so to me, it's kind of, what are you going to put in front of that person that drives value, and without getting in the way of their game. The other thing which you kind of touched upon it earlier on in your slide, you talked about in-game, game adjacent, and
away from game.
Away from game, that's right. The in-game thing I find fascinating for me specifically, both as a strategist but also as a gamer. I look at it and I go, okay, I think there's a bigger licensing play there somewhere, because yes, you could just go, I'm going to stick some ads in some games, but actually the longer license play. So whether that's Ted Lasso showing up in FIFA, or Microsoft Flight Simulator launching a Top Gun Maverick piece of DLC. The lead times on that, don't get me wrong, I think Top Gun was 2 years, Ted Lasso was 3 years. The lead times are ridiculous, but the payoff is far, far better than just sticking an ad on a banner.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that always strikes me about some of those broader opportunities is that they're not entirely unlike other entertainment sponsorships, but the shelf life of games is quite long relative to a movie, where realistically you're looking at opening weekend and a few weeks thereafter. So I want to jump ahead a little bit because, again, I think unfortunately folks had to listen to me instead of you. But when you've gone up and given these talks, I think you recently went viral. It was on LinkedIn, but
Don't say that.
Yeah, there it is.
Go viral.
We're going to still count it.
You said you wouldn't say that.
And, James puts a slide behind him, and I quote, that says, "Anybody who stands on the stage and tells you the metaverse is the future hasn't got a fucking clue, and you should not be okay with that." James, potty mouth, but also, what did you mean by that? Like, what's the background of that sentiment?
So there's a few things. There are a few things. One was, right, first of all, it's true. I stand by it. I'm pulling faces, but I fucking stand by it. The second thing is, you should not be okay with it, is the main takeout. I mean, that presentation, that's like slide 3 of a 63-slide presentation. And the following 60 slides is me telling you why it's true. Because you're doing two things. People talking about the metaverse right now are either talking about gaming, or they're talking about desolate wasteland websites which are just empty. And if the person in the room did the Argos thing in Decentraland is here, we're stepping outside afterward. But the overall thing for me is, if you've got a client saying we should be doing something in the metaverse, and they want to talk to millions of people, and I'm guessing they do, then you're talking about video games. If they don't want to talk about video games, then you're talking to hundreds of people, and that's a waste of time and money. So let's just call things what they are. And if it's a VR game, fine, it's a VR game. By the way, you've got 1,000 users to talk to. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, oh, it's the attention economy. Yeah, fine, the attention of 1,000 people split across the world. Great, good luck.
I mean, and that's the other lovely thing about Insights, is that it does allow you to kind of separate the real opportunities from things that are a little bit kind of flash in the pan at the moment. So we're right down to the wire. James, next 12 months, what should everyone here be paying attention to or thinking about as it pertains to gaming?
This year for games has been really, really tough. We're feeling an echo of post-COVID, so there's been virtually 0 AAA games this year. Next 12 to 18 months, I think it was said on a previous talk, the platforms, the developers and the publishers are finally cottoning on to the fact that maybe they need their technology available to media buyers. And so we're going to see more and more of that. So just keep pushing on the doors because that technology is here and it's arriving post-COVID.
James, thank you so much. Everyone, thank you so much. You've been very kind. You can find this research and more at our website. And I went by, it's activisionblizzardmedia.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I nearly went.
2 questions while I have you. One, creative. We're talking lots and lots about media today, probably quite rightly, but we talk about sort of efficiency. We sort of mediated out all the media we can. When you get to creative, feels like we think about in-game, you think about these massive screens, we've heard Jumbotron earlier on. It's a really good canvas for creative, surely. Do you think creatives are excited by things like gaming?
Yeah, but I don't think they understand it. And it's funny, it was mentioned I used to argue with my creative directors when I worked at Ogilvy, look, you know the size of a 48 sheet, it's in the name, but why don't you understand the size of an in-feed Twitter ad? And you should. And it's the same argument that comes back, right? As soon as we start to get to standardization for in-game media buying, you should be pushing hard on creatives and saying, you know what the space looks like, make it work.
And only because you mentioned him, Byron Sharp's hot take on attention. If you see, and I'm paraphrasing, you see a bus shelter, you see an ad, whether you see it for 2 seconds or 20 seconds, still does the same job. Is he right or is he horribly wrong?
Well, it's a part of the job. It's not. I mean, Christ, as marketers, we have
light in the touch paper here.
But we have this whole thing about binary, right? It's this or it's that. It's like, no, it's everything. Come on, it's mass penetration, and it's also direct to action, and it's call to action, and come on, it's everything. It's not just, it has to be this or that. It's not binary.
I mean, and and I'm not a PhD measurement scientist, but what I have seen in the past is that, I just got to wield it like a club sometimes, is that, there is something to like 1 or 2 seconds. It will be something where it's going to register a logo. Deeper engagement requires more, and that's just how we work cognitively. So like so many things, there's a time and a place for any one of these. But again, I think to some of the points that we heard before, like making sure that we're paying attention to things like attention is going to be a new potential metric that we can judge the worthiness of it.
Jonathan, James, that was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.